today I'm going to talk to you about podcasting for profit. This is how I actually make money with podcasting and how we do it for our clients. This method has generated millions of dollars in revenue for our clients, and today I'm going to break it down to you. All right, so first thing, I want to give you a little intro who I am. My name is Matthew. My friends call me Matt. Originally, I started out as a drummer. I moved to Nashville to study music professionally. And then I created Old Soul Rhythm Round when COVID first started. And my passion for the drums led to a passion for business. Podcasting has presented a lot of opportunities for me that I'm very grateful for, including collaborating with clients like Goodwill, TEDx, and podcasting actually took me to the continent of Africa, and I did some live podcasting there, which was pretty dope. All right, so I have a few assumptions for this talk. This is not teaching you how to start a podcast. Here are the requirements. First, you need to have a good offer. If you don't have a good offer, this isn't really going to work. Second, you either have a podcast or you have the tools you need to build a podcast and are willing to make one. And then third, you're willing to be on camera and you feel comfortable with that. Now, as you guys know, at the Symposium podcast, that's with Wiz. He's anonymous. We're still making it happen. So maintaining an anonymous status or having your camera off for the podcast is still a possibility. There's just a little bit more you can get with the camera on, unless, of course, you're the Wiz of ecom. So I am not talking to you about sponsorships. I'm not talking to you about advertisements. We're not talking about monetizing on Spotify or on YouTube. This is none of that. The big idea is basically you're on one part of a cliff and there's this big gap in between and your dream client is on the other side. So how are we going to get across? We use the podcast as a bridge. The idea is basically if you want to do business with company ABC, instead of sending a cold DM, hey, will you get on a call, whatever, you're going to invite the CEO, CTO, CFO, whoever it may be from company ABC to your podcast. The podcast is the bridge that actually begins the relationship. This is a better method that we found for getting you face-to-face with people you want to do business with versus cold DMs or cold call to get on a sales call. You know what I mean? Okay, so how are we actually going to do this? You first need to start out with identifying your ideal customer persona, otherwise known as an ICP, or the avatar. This will include things like you talk about their core needs. You'll talk about their frustrations. Maybe you throw in a little bio. What motivates them in life? What challenges do they have? What are other brands and influences that they like? What are the different touch points you can be making with them? What channels are you speaking to them on? And then at the very last one, how are you actually helping them? I will provide this tool for you guys for you to use. You can fill it in, throw a little picture in where that the orange square is. And this is going to guide you on who are we actually inviting to your podcast? Who is the decision maker from the company? Is it the CEO or is it a creative director? I don't know. It depends on your business. Okay. For sourcing guests, here are a few tools. Podmatch is basically Tinder for podcasting. It matches podcast hosts with podcast guests. There are tons of professionals that are using Podmatch that want to be guests or they have their own shows. And I just recommend you check it out to see if you find someone that fits your ICP in here. Otherwise, get on social media. Look at companies you want to do business with, find their heads of whatever, and you can reach out to them in the DMs. You can also cold email them. I'll just tell you something that's been really successful for us with cold email is the subject line is simply podcast interview request dash the podcast name, your name, whatever, or just podcast interview request dash the person you're contacting, their name. That's worked for us, and I'm sure it will work for you. Okay, so we need to calculate the cost. Like you're wondering, Matt, how am I actually going to make money from this thing? Well, that starts by first identifying where your expenses. Your expenses are going to be, maybe you pay for an editor, designer, whatever. You figure out that cost, and then you need to add the time element to it. So how long is it taking you to source guests, to interview them, and more? And within that, you want to think about like, okay, if I'm dedicating time towards this podcast for lead generation, then what does that cost? Like what's your effective your effective hourly rate, right? So you add those two numbers together, you're getting your costs. Now you need to think about, okay, with my offer size, what is one new client worth? So you take that number and you subtract the cost, and that's your profit. So just as an example, you have a $2,500 offer. It costs about $500 for you to acquire them because you pay a designer, I don't know. So it's $2,000 of profit. Now, let's say that's only for month one. If it's $2,500 for a 6-month contract, that's $15,000 that you're going to be making with a $500 acquisition cost. Really not that bad at least I don't think so. Okay, so here are a few additional benefits to podcasting. First one, you're going to be having a consistent and constant pipeline of leads. What do I mean? With this podcast model, you can be scheduling out in advance. I highly, highly recommend you do that. Do not get in this spot where it's like, oh, I need to do a podcast episode this week and I need to worry about finding someone next week. No. Take time, set it up, and work on building out your calendar, as we call your editorial calendar, so you always have a constant pipeline of leads. What we like to do is we take the first 30 days in our business to set up a new podcast for our client. During that time, we're identifying guests and we're inviting them to the show. And my goal is always booking 2 months worth of prospects out at a time so that we're always operating in abundance and we're never in scarcity, like, who are we releasing next week? You know what I mean? Another benefit is you are going to get so much social media content from this. It's going to be crazy. So if you're pushing on Twitter, every episode needs to be a thread. If you're pushing on Instagram, you can take your thread and make it into an Instagram carousel and post it there. You can get short form content. Remember the video component I brought up earlier. Short form videos for TikTok, for TikToks, for Instagram Reels, for YouTube Shorts, possibly Snapchat Spotlight if it applies. You can also develop what are called audiograms. So for my folks out there that don't want to show your face, totally cool. You're going to take the audio and find a moment that's powerful, stands by itself. Think all the Hormozy stuff with the value content that's created. Find that audio and you're going to place a dope graphic on it. Maybe you're going to animate a audio waveform so it's moving and people understand, oh, I need to click to listen type thing. And you're going to make content that way. This is going to legitimize your podcast. This is going to legitimize your business. And these are all value adds to the people coming on. So you're wondering, Matt, why would a CEO of a company get on a podcast with me? Fantastic question. Here's why. You're giving them a platform to tell their story, to tell their company's story. You're providing social media content that makes them look like an authority in this space. And then 3, you're using their story to broadcast to your network and you're leveraging your network. These are all things you bring up if you face objections like, well, I don't want to be on your show. In truth, I've had maybe 2 people in the past 2.5 years of doing this that have said like, no, it's not for me. And that's okay, because like anything, it's not going to be for everyone. So what I recommend you do instead is totally fine. I understand. 2 questions for you. 1, would you like me to follow up 6 months from now and see if you're interested in being on the show? Or 2, are there 2 people that you recommend would be fantastic guests for my podcast? If so, can you please refer them to me? So at least it's all for nothing, right? The last additional benefit I want to talk about right now is a bonus, and this is sponsorships and advertisements. All right, I'm going to give you some sauce on this one. Don't tell the world. When it comes to sponsorships, yes, you can try to talk with companies like BetterHelp or DraftKings or some random e-com brand, and you get affiliate codes and all that. Or talk to your existing clients and ask them if they'd like an opportunity to be a sponsor for your podcast, and they receive the following. Every piece of social media content has their logo in the corner, brand awareness. They also could, have an email blast that goes out to your network that talks about the sponsorship, thanking them, right? The third one that's really valuable is you're going to interview the person from the company on the show and get them in there. The sponsorship is basically going to be providing any effort so you can offload the responsibilities of editing and uploading and all that. So you're going to be making money from that, and you're going to be making money by gaining new clients. And from the advertisement front, think all the traditional monetization routes. With YouTube, you just have to hit a certain number of views, and then YouTube's going to throw ads on it. Keep in mind, YouTube also just released their podcast feature, so podcasting ain't going anywhere, right? Advertisements still apply to Spotify as well. If you listen to podcasts, you've always heard, thank you to our host so-and-so. Use this discount code and you get 10% off. You know what I mean? Now, a few reminders for you. One, you are not selling your services on the podcast. This is not a sales call. I'm going to say it one more time. When you are recording and interviewing guests, you are not selling your services on the podcast. This is not a sales call. This is not a sales call. The quickest way to ruin your reputation for this podcast, the quickest way to turn prospects off is be like, oh, well, so you have this issue, with my company, we could solve that. And this is how we do it. No, because the point of the podcast is to begin the relationship. If afterwards you want to talk to them about the problems that came up in your business, in their business, and how you can solve them, that's how you should be landing them as a client. But they don't want to be sold to, and you're just saying, oh, it's a podcast, but really I'm just pitching you. No. So Matt, where are we going to ask them? You're going to ask them questions of their journey. How did they get here? Well, how do I even begin that? Look at on LinkedIn, ask them for a bio. You need to work on storytelling. It's all story. That's what this boils down to. So find those moments. Oh, you started as a clerk at this supermarket, but now you're running a company? How did that happen? Oh, you started as a teacher and now you're the chief academic officer. What happened in those times? What grades were you teaching? Oh, that's interesting. Why make the shift? What was it about teaching that you felt was lacking, or did you feel like you could make a greater impact at this? These are all just ways of digging deeper. So one more time, you are not selling your services on the podcast. This is not a sales call. So that leads to this question. Well, Matt, how am I going from a podcast guest to a client? Fantastic question. This is how you're going to land the deal. First, you are going to follow up with them. Immediately following the recording, you're going to send them thank you. Hey, thank you so much for meeting with me today. It was really a pleasure having you on the show. You also, here's the sauce, give them a personalized message. As the interview's going on, I need you to be thinking about, oh, this is interesting that they spoke about, because in your follow-up email, you're going to say, I really love learning about your experience moving from this country to this country and how that impacted your decision-making in the future with where you're at currently. It shows them you're actively listening and that you really care about the things they have to say. Second step, this is all the same day. Follow up with them and connect on LinkedIn. This seems like a low-hanging fruit. If you're not on LinkedIn, you're missing out. But a lot of podcast hosts I've worked with, they don't connect with their guests on LinkedIn, but they want to land them as a client. And it's like, why aren't we adding them to see your daily or weekly content is beyond me. All right. On launch day, this is the day the podcast episode is going live. You're going to email them when the episode goes live, and you're going to include assets for the episode. What does that mean? The links. Here's the YouTube link. Here's the Spotify link, Apple Music link, whatever. You're going to give them social media posts. Here's the thumbnail. Here's the show notes from it. Here are the key points. Here are all these things. This is called a value add. You are providing value to them, saying, you know what? I loved interviewing you on the show. I created this podcast that highlights you, and I'm also giving you content that you can use to post internally to your company, that you can post in your newsletter, that you can post on your social media channels. These value adds are going to make them trust you more and like you more, if we're being honest. And then from there, you can figure out the time delay. Maybe 2 days after that, you hit them up for the sales call. Start with a compliment. Again, getting some really great feedback from your podcast episode. I'm curious, what has your team thought about it? What do you think about it? And then weave your podcast episode findings into how you can solve a problem they have. Oh, you mentioned that right now you guys are really experimenting with ChatGPT. You think that there's a lot of lengths that we can go with that, right? Well, my company, we've actually found that ChatGPT only gets you so far. And we're a social media marketing agency, and my team fills the gap in between. I don't know, I'm just spitballing, yeah? Would love to get your thoughts on this. I have a few ideas I'd love to run by you. Do you have 15 minutes next week? Bam. That begins it. Now, going through all of this, you're adding value, you're building trust, you're building rapport. So when you get on that sales call, they're going to trust you a heck of a lot more. All right? And that is how we're podcasting for profit. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to connect with me, hit me up on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Matthew Milstein. On Twitter, I'm Podcast for Profit. I'm going to be pushing out way more content on Twitter in the coming weeks. And if you have any questions, DM me there. Thank you much, my friends.